Espomage. The Desolate Planet. Sherlock Holmes, The Galactic Cases. Episode 15. Based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go Audio production. That this had to happen to me of all people, Decker lamented, whilst eagerly studying the construction plans. My ship running on emergency power. You have no reason to blame yourself, Holmes reassured him, peering over his shoulder. You handled the hostile encounter with the ill-fated vessel brilliantly and saved us all from catastrophe. The emergency lighting bathed the library in warm light, which seemed as if cast by a candle holder. Daflon, who had become a good friend of Holmes, entered wearing his white coat, adding further illumination to the scene. Ah, our technical luminary, Decker rejoiced. You arrive at precisely the right moment. What do you hope to find in the plans, Captain? He inquired. The reason why the ship's computer has fallen silent and our propulsion system is on its last legs, he replied. Have you any idea? Hunches are for amateurs. I am a scientist, Daflon reminded him. The propulsion unit alone consists of 10,000 parts, any single one of which could have broken down. If I didn't know better, Decker sighed, I would say that blasted enemy ship dragged our computer's spirit into the black hole. If you had to make an educated guess, dear Daflon, Holmes pressed, what would it be? My best guess would be that the accelerator has been damaged due to overheating caused by the enormous strain, explained the scientific director with a serious expression. And, to preempt your next question, to fix it we need either tons of salt water, like that found on an ocean planet, or 1 kilogram of the reactive element strontium. Well, at least that's a lead, muttered Decker, as he swapped the construction plans of the Ultimo One for a star catalogue of the known universe, which he awkwardly spread out as it contained oversized drawings of the solar systems. Finally, he pointed to a spot. Right then, we're here near the Tarantula Nebula in the Swordfish constellation, 163,000 light-years from home, and naturally, there's no ocean planet in sight. At the speed we can generate, we're a week away from where a still unsettled Earth-like planet orbits a yellow dwarf called Dorado. It's just at the beginning of the habitable zone, which means it's desert-like. We're unlikely to find salt water there, but strontium, possibly. The only planet is still unexplored and treacherous, Daflon agreed. As I recall that 40 years ago, there was already an attempt to colonize it. Sadly, contact was quickly lost. The pioneers were never heard from again, not even a distress signal. It's possible that none of them ever reached Dorado B. We must therefore assume that they all perished, Decker reasoned. And yet, this inhospitable planet remains our destination in the absence of other options. I've never been this far from Earth, by the way. Holmes patted him kindly on the shoulder. It does not matter whether we are 1 light-year or 100,000 light-years from home. We are at the mercy of technology either way. A small comfort, but at least the emergency drive is still working, Decker nodded. We must therefore set course for there. After a week that felt more like a month, the Ultimo One swung into orbit around Dorado B. The ship's computer continued to prefer its silent existence, and the crew had passed the time as best they could. From above, the planet looked like a mustard-yellow ball. It had a moon but no artificial satellites, though this did not necessarily mean it was uninhabited. We do not know whether we shall be greeted with confetti or cannon fire, said the captain, who stood on the bridge and cast a glance downward through the front window. Should there be survivors against all expectations, they have likely buried themselves in the sand to withstand the heat. But I do not think that after so many years, any life could have survived here without managing to make contact with us. Yes, First Officer Torno exclaimed excitedly. I can see something that could be wreckage. Indeed, confirmed Decker, who had an old-fashioned telescope handed to him by Robot Elmer. "Whilst I cannot determine whether it's from one of our ships, you shall land immediately with Holmes and Watson in the shuttle and report back to me. And above all, search for the required strontium." "Aye, aye, sir," rejoiced the first officer, looking forward to an adventure after a long period of inactivity. A short while later, Holmes and his friend Watson had already donned becoming khaki suits with matching pith helmets and taken their seats in the shuttle alongside Torno, who wore his silver uniform. The flight downward was brief and, thanks to minimal atmospheric interference, smooth. All three disembarked and were struck by a wave of heat. "Phew," groaned Torno. "I'd estimate that's 40 degrees, but I'll check my smart bracelet just to be sure, though it's only offering basic functions at the moment. 38.8 degrees. Not a bad guess at all. Sir, can you hear me?" Instead of an answer, only a metallic crackling sound emanated from the bracelet. "We're thrown back on our own resources," Holmes stated dryly, and retrieved 2 large water bottles from the shuttle, one of which he handed to Dr. Watson. "Thank you. In Sumerian literature, the gateway to the underworld lies in the desert," lectured the doctor. "And in ancient Egyptian texts, the desert is understood as the realm of the dead." "Well, I see this from a purely scientific perspective," said Torno with a sweeping gesture. "The only thing that comes to mind is horror vacui, nature's aversion to emptiness." Indeed, vast desolation spread out before them. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing but sand, and yet more mountains of sand to behold. And at some distance, something metallic protruded from the sandy masses. Excitedly, Tornot rushed towards it, followed by his 2 companions, who trudged after him through the soft sand. Whilst one half of the obvious wreckage appeared totally unusable, the other half at least offered serviceable shade, into which all 3 could retreat from the scorching sun named Dorado. Thirst set in, and they emptied their water bottles before turning their full attention to the large piece of wreckage. It was a sort of capsule, its glass viewing window still intact. Oddly enough, this window was not tarnished with dust, but appeared freshly polished. "That would please the busy housewife," Torno joked, and stood on tiptoes to peer inside. "There's nothing in this peculiar capsule. No seating, no instruments, absolutely nothing." "There is no entrance either," observed Holmes, who had already circled the capsule. "At the back here, it seems to have broken off from some sort of construction. What do you think, Mr. Torno? Is this wreckage from a Galactic Union vessel?" "Hard to say, as I'm not familiar with the ships from the era 40 years ago. Without access to the onboard computer, we can't verify that either. We must try to find a way in somehow." He was already shaking the capsule vigorously, which moved back and forth slightly. "I'll try to climb up to find an entrance at the top." "We'll give you a leg up," announced the doctor. With combined efforts, Holmes and Dr. Watson managed to hoist Tornot up so that he could climb onto the capsule. "Up here, there's no hatch that can be levered open either," he announced disappointedly. "However, from here, I can see some people approaching from one of the sand dunes. They appear to be just 3 harmless desert nomads." At walking pace, a group of men in grey hooded overalls approached. Laser pistols hung visibly at their hips. One of the men drew his pistol and fired a beam towards the capsule. With a hissing sound, the red beam penetrated the sand and sent an impressive fountain of liquefied sand shooting upwards, like a geyser that had just erupted from the ground. "How could you possibly fall for such an outlandish assumption that they were all harmless, Mr. Torno?" wondered Holmes, though he made no attempt to retreat, as he recognised it was merely a warning. "We are unarmed and come in peace," Torno called from his elevated position. "Come down at once," ordered the man who had fired the laser beam, and who now, flanked by his companions, came to a halt at a distance of 15 metres. Torno jumped into the soft sand and faced the rather sinister fellows. My name is Tornot, and I am the first officer of the Ultimo One. Behind me, you can see Sherlock Holmes and Dr Watson. If you direct your gaze towards the sky, you can make out the silhouette of our ship beneath the moon. The well-coordinated squad acted as a single organism and jointly cast their eyes upward briefly, verified the accuracy of Torno's statement, and then glared at him hostilely once more. "May I ask with whom we have the honour?" Holmes ventured to address the three men. "How quickly one falls into oblivion when one fails to send a success report to the Union," grinned the man in the middle of the squad as he slipped his laser pistol back into its holster. "It took us 20 years to arrive here. After awakening from deep sleep, we discovered that the planet was already occupied by sand scramblers, utterly repulsive, man-sized woodlouse creatures that attacked us immediately with the most modern weapons, without hesitation. As we can see, you have successfully resisted them," Torno praised. "And how well equipped you are, sir. I don't recognize these uniforms at all. What we wear is soft, flexible Kevlar that is twice as effective as metal armor and can withstand bullets as well as laser beams," he explained, briefly baring his teeth. "By the way, I am Corporal Joseph Lydon, and these are my adjutants Sharp and Gotwing." With raised eyebrows, Holmes realised. So mankind is still as warlike as in the Middle Ages, only the armour and weapons are different. "Consider," Corporal Joseph Lydon addressed him, "mankind had to digest many hardships, and still does, especially those hardships imposed upon them by their own species. You have crashed right into this very centre of unrest during a brief period of ceasefire." "So this is a war planet then," Dr Watson realised. "War is the wrong expression," Corporal Joseph Lydon corrected him. "It is rather a new arrangement with the use of structural and individual force to achieve specific interests." "And those would be?" Holmes inquired. "Total takeover." The corporal puffed out his chest. His face, tanned by heat and hardened by constant battle, showed little emotion. He appeared to be in his late 40s, though he looked older. "That's what they used to call war," Torno noted. "A martial word that rather represents an insult to such noble men as mine," Lydon dismissed with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if shooing away a pesky fly. "Oh, a refined soul, as I would never have suspected so far from home," Holmes remarked. "Your men enjoy inflicting violence, Corporal?" Tornot inquired. "My men demonstrate determination, loyalty, and courage. In every combat mission, they give their last drop of blood," he praised his fighters, while his adjutants nodded in agreement. "Surely some men were left bloodless then," Tornot jested, earning himself a sharp glare which showed him that Corporal Joseph Lydon possessed not a spark of humour, so he backtracked. "Well, in any case, I too am prepared to give my life for the good cause." "Those who speak in such a manner," Corporal Joseph Lydon remarked scornfully with a cutting voice, "are always the first ones to kick the bucket." "Well, it seems you've met your match here, Mr. Torner," Holmes whispered to him, then said to Joseph Lydon, "But consider this. Over the course of years of combat operations, not only the oppressed are destroyed, but also the oppressors. Even if you give the war another name, it remains destructive, dear Corporal. That may be so, but fighting against war is like fighting against windmills. Peace is merely the continuation of war through gentler means. Death occurs in both cases. There are accidents, suicides, which rarely happen during war, privately motivated murders, and even serial killings. I find war preferable in that respect, because in combat every soldier carries a weapon for defence. In peacetime, many stand helplessly before their murderers." This machine-gun-like burst of words was followed by a defiant stamp of his right foot, raising a small cloud of dust. "And at the end of war, only one victor remains standing." "Yes, atop a pile of rubble," replied Dr. Watson. I served as a military doctor in Afghanistan and was forced to witness the continuous dying. At any rate, this is certainly a savage planet. Here, one encounters nature with great reverence and a touch of pride, if one survives it, and all the creatures it has produced in its foul mood, claimed the corporal, whilst his eyes appeared to sparkle. What else can you tell us about nature here, Corporal Lydon? Torno wanted to know. It is unpredictable. Sandstorms appear out of nowhere. With immense force they could whisk away entire battalions. That is why we mostly stay underground. What can you tell us about your adversaries? Inquired Holmes. Inhuman. The advantage is that only two parties are fighting here. The disadvantage is that one of them is not human, and at last you have come to support us. After this statement, he turned to his adjutants and whispered something to them. This militarist thinks we came here for his sake, Torno said, holding his head in disbelief. Then we best let him believe that, advised Holmes, who, due to his knowledge of human nature, knew that the corporal would be easily agitated by any contradiction. Perhaps I shouldn't have mentioned my experience as an army doctor, Dr. Watson feared. The man might not let me leave at all. Meanwhile, the central star had sunk somewhat towards the horizon and drawn some brightness from the sky. However, this had no effect on the temperature. The bone-dry heat forced sweat from everyone's pores. Come with us, Torno and company. I shall introduce you to my entire army. You will be amazed, promised the corporal, and marched briskly in the direction from which he had come. I shall now show you how to enter the underworld. We are as tense as a medieval crossbow, joked Torno and followed him. I have a rather bad feeling about this, Dr. Watson whispered to Sherlock Holmes. I feel exactly the same way, he assured him, but we shall not let it show. Feelings are for mothers who must care for their offspring. I am essentially just a brain. My body is merely an appendix. Meanwhile, the onboard computer had reported back on the Ultimo 1. The solar power from Dorado had indeed had a favourable effect on it. Full of energy, it booted up and triumphantly reported its readiness for duty. Please wait. After restart, final update in progress. Processing will take 2 minutes and 58 seconds. At last, rejoiced Decker, who had been observing the encounter between the two groups of 3 from the bridge through his telescope with mounting concern. Although it had looked like the formation of 6 ants, he could discern without a doubt that apart from one warning shot, no combat had yet taken place. Nevertheless, he believed he could sense the tense situation even from this great distance. Daflon, first, I shall verify your information about the pioneers who, contrary to expectations, have managed to gain a foothold here. The scientific director Daflon, who had persevered beside Decker, rubbed his hands. My memory rarely fails me, Captain. However, I have only stored rudimentary details about the Enterprise, as it held no significance for me. After slightly more than 2 minutes and 58 seconds, Decker demanded impatiently, Computer, all details about the ship that departed for Dorado B 40 years ago. At that moment, the blonde lurer from accounting entered the bridge. Today, she was wearing a comfortable blue jumpsuit and uncomfortable matching high heels. With one hand, she held out a long computer printout to the captain. Sir, I apologise for the interruption, but I don't know how to record this. The ship's computer printed out this list for me as soon as it was rebooted. And what does it say? Asked Decker, who had absolutely no desire to be delayed by such administrative tasks. Keep it brief, Lurer. With lowered head, she read aloud, failure of both main circuits, failure of the propulsion units, failure of the control synapses for the steering system. Lurer, he interrupted her explanations. You're not planning to list all the technical details now, are you? But you asked to know what was on the computer printout, she squeaked, offended. I've skimmed through the data. there are 195 items, all listed individually. And what is unclear to you about this, my dear? Asked Decker, who was trying not to sound too irritated. Well, I need to assign a damage value to each item, which then needs to be properly recorded. Well, just enter the price according to the tariff and that's it, he suggested, whilst demonstratively patting his thigh. It's not that simple, sir, as there is already quite a bit of wear and tear present, she explained to him in a tone normally used when speaking to a small child. Therefore, I am asking you whether I should calculate the wear and tear per light year, which would amount to nearly zero given 163,000 light years for the last flight alone, or whether I should calculate the wear and tear as a flat rate. Again, he interrupted her. Lyra, I truly leave this to your discretion. As captain of this ship, I have entirely different concerns. At the moment, I'm racking my brain about whether the crew of one of our ships is still loyal to the Galactic Union after 40 years, or if they've gone independent. Oh, please don't tell me that I should also calculate the wear and tear of this ship after such a long time, sir, she worried, whilst waving her computer printout about. No, you shall calculate all 195 items as a flat rate, and that's the end of it. As you wish, sir, she replied tartly. Computer, he barked at the machine. How much longer will it take for the report about the ship dispatched 40 years ago? Daphlon rolled his eyes and wished he were invisible. Lyra shot him questioning glances, but received no signals from him that she could interpret as an answer. The computer voice boomed with almost frightening clarity. The Exodus left Earth 40 years ago with 66 convicts aboard, all murderers whose consciousness of their crimes was erased. What? Decker could not comprehend. What is that supposed to mean? What was the purpose of the settlement? A penal colony? Or a suicide mission? Negative, squawked the computer. Amnesty International demanded the abolition of the death penalty for all 66 delinquents at the International Court of Justice, and won their case. The criminal portions of their brains were erased and replaced with those of brave military personnel who had already fallen in the Mars War. After 20 years in deep sleep, the crew of the Exodus reached their destination and have not been heard from since. Oh, brilliant, Decker sneered and tapped his temple. That means to me that the exchange of portions in the criminals' brains must not have worked properly. Not necessarily, Daphlon objected and pointed out. It's entirely possible that the military personnel are simply maintaining radio silence due to circumstances we cannot know about. For example, an enemy who must be prevented from travelling in the direction from which they themselves came. Do you understand, Captain Decker? Ah, you mean to protect our Mother Earth and all the people who still inhabit her? That's exactly what I think, Captain. Well, I hope you're right, Daphlon, although my gut feeling has some doubts. Men and feelings, Lyra remarked dismissively before leaving the bridge. In the underground facility, accessed by inconspicuous stone steps behind a sand dune, much like the entrance to an Egyptian tomb, pleasant temperatures of 25 degrees prevailed alongside bright lighting. Tornot, Holmes, and Dr. Watson looked around, thoroughly impressed. I must express my admiration, said the doctor. You have indeed been quite industrious over the past years, Corporal. This bunker must be at least as large as the London Underground, the oldest underground railway, which opened in 1863. Corporal Lydon had pushed back his hood and ran his hand over his brunette crew cut. We constructed robots from our spacecraft that both managed the entire construction and provided excellent defensive services. Several enemy nests have already been smoked out this way. Industrious, industrious. And how many casualties did you have to accept, Corporal? Probed Torno, who imperceptibly attempted to consult his smart bracelet. Compared to the enemy, only a few. 11 loyal soldiers fell in a heroic death. We were able to successfully clone them and resurrect them in our laboratory. Let us now have something to drink. The water here is subjected to a cycle. You know what that means?" The corporal tested the visitors. "I'm afraid so," replied Holmes with a sour expression. "Fortunately, we had something to drink earlier," recalled Tornot, who had noticed that his bracelet was refusing to work. "But we wouldn't say no to a small snack." Without further words, Corporal Lydon led his visitors into a festive hall, where a long table stood, which was immediately set by robots. On silver trays, the steel men marched in step, bringing plates of steaming meat. At Lydon's hand signal, the 30 soldiers present in the room, as well as the 3 visitors, sat down at the table. After an audible clearing of his throat, the corporal began a speech. "Men, here I present to you 3 representatives of the Galactic Union, who gave us this planet as a gift, whose full splendor we still must bitterly fight for. But they have finally come to provide each of us with a bride, so that after 2 victorious decades of valiant battle, we can reproduce naturally. Enjoy your meal." After he had sat down, everyone clapped and cheered enthusiastically, whilst the 3 visitors sat stunned before their plates. Even the piquant aroma of the meat could not entice them to eat. On the bridge of the Ultimo One, Daflon approached the captain with a worried-looking face. "Sir, I'm afraid I've discovered something rather unpleasant." "I thought as much, that you'd have more bad news up your sleeve. What is it? Out with it quickly," Decker demanded gruffly. The soil analysis revealed that the planet is quite undermined. That is to say, there are passages, tunnels, and so forth that suggest considerable activity which cannot have originated solely from the 66 pioneers we left here, the scientific director disclosed. And if that weren't enough, their new identity may begin to fade after a year and a day. Decker swallowed before narrowing his eyes to slits and realized. So, Dorado B is inhabited by a civilization that lives underground. We can therefore assume that there was a confrontation with the arriving pioneers. That would explain the radio silence, and now, to make everything even more complicated, it's possible that these people might suddenly remember their criminal past. Well, if it hasn't already happened, then after 20 years it could occur at any time, Daflon admitted. Therefore, I advise making contact with Tornot immediately. "Computer!" Decker called out in alarm. "Establish contact with the first officer on Dorado B immediately." "Negative!" called back the computer voice. "The planet is using a scrambler that destroys any connection." Decker angrily leapt from his command chair. "This is absolutely incredible. How much bad luck can one person have? First running on emergency power, then the first officer unarmed on a hostile planet in danger. And now, even the most basic communication technology is failing." With a placating gesture, Daflon tried to calm him. "Don't get upset, Captain. Tornot is quite a clever chap." "His wit will hardly prevail against hostile superior forces," Decker barked back. "I had better send down our main robot Elmer to help." "I advise against that, sir. Let Sherlock Holmes do the thinking. He has enough psychological intuition to make himself heard even in the worst case." Daflon made a case for his friend, whom he had come to know and appreciate during his stay aboard. To top it all off, Lura re-entered the bridge and smiled amiably before announcing, "Following your instructions, I calculated everything as a lump sum, sir, and, unfortunately, the computer informed me that the Ultimo One is only worth scrap value now. What should I do?" With an awkward gesture, Decker wiped his forehead before wearily condescending to give an answer. "One should never parry a question with a counter-question, but what do you think you should do now, Lura?" She played with her blonde curls with one finger while stroking her lips with the other. "I think I should undertake a revaluation of the ship, sir." "Bravo!" Decker applauded her briefly. "That is exactly what I would do in your position. However, A revaluation is only possible if new material is introduced to the ship from an external source, she explained with half-closed eyelids. On this occasion, Daphlon helpfully interjected. You are welcome to do that, dear Lura, as we need 1 kilogram of strontium, which we intend to harvest from the planet Dorado B. And when will that be? Lura inquired, releasing the blonde curl wrapped around her finger so that it bounced loosely onto her forehead, creating a rather saucy impression. Neither of us knows that, as we're not clairvoyants, Decker snapped. But if you'd like, you're welcome to take a little trip down there, Lura. I'm sure the inhabitants of Dorado B would welcome you with open arms. Pardon me for being born, Lura snapped and strutted away offended, causing a loud click-clack sound. Now you've frightened her unfairly, sir, Daphlon scolded him. One ought not to fall out with people from accounting. They have a certain influence when it comes to promotion decisions. You do want to become Fleet Admiral someday, don't you, sir? Shaking his head, Decker muttered. I'd better instruct Tornot to pick another bouquet of flowers from the planet for the young lady. At the same time, the corporal and 30 of his men were noisily stuffing their faces, whilst Torno could barely swallow a bite. Uncertainly, he whispered to Sherlock Holmes on his right. What am I supposed to tell this Leiden chap? That we haven't brought any women for him at all? That would spoil his appetite and our entire stay, Holmes whispered back, who in his English refinement only took small morsels. We should rather convince him that the prevailing conditions here offer no incentive for ladies to pay their respects to this place. And what shall I tell him if he demands an evacuation? Well, he doesn't really look like that to me. To me, he seems unyielding, not to say stubborn. In competition with itself, this army can hardly achieve victory. What's all this whispering about? Asked the corporal suspiciously, setting his cutlery aside. A morsel of food still dangled from the corner of his mouth, which he reclaimed with his tongue, almost like a frog snapping at a maggot. We were just discussing the safety of the ladies whom you and your men so eagerly await, Holmes confessed to him with half the truth. You see, Corporal Leiden, the ongoing combat between you and these unpleasant sandcrawlers could, ceasefire or not, greatly deter the ladies. For female beings are, by nature, not as death-defying and heroic as you. Yes, I have no fear of dying, but I do not wish to die in vain, Corporal Joseph Leiden proclaimed solemnly, whilst theatrically beating his chest with his fist, almost as if he were standing on a stage performing a leading role before a large audience. I have no fear of dying either, but I do not wish to die in agony, Holmes countered whilst meticulously dabbing his mouth. Ha ha, you have a sense of humour, old chap. I like that. Would you like to take charge of entertaining my troops? I would be delighted if you pay me in strontium, he agreed spontaneously. Surely you have some at your disposal. Strontium? How peculiar, but as you wish, so be it, Leiden agreed whilst nodding thoughtfully. It is abundant here. We use it to manufacture explosives. Yes, one could also use it for fireworks, Torno interjected. We have little appreciation for such frippery here, remarked the corporal. When something goes bang around here, someone usually dies, and it's the enemy. Suddenly, a young recruit, looking barely older than 18, with a pale face, rushed to the corporal's side and saluted. What is it, Wigmore? Corporal, he blurted out breathlessly. Major Yardley is dead. At that, Leiden leapt up as if stung by a tarantula. Immediately, absolute silence fell over the banquet hall. One could have heard the proverbial pin drop, had anyone had one to hand. All eyes in attendance were fixed upon the scene. What do you mean he's dead? Corporal Joseph Leiden asked sharply. And without any enemy contact at that. The recruit named Wigmore shifted from one foot to the other. He simply dropped dead, sir. With a robot, one would call it material fatigue. With a human, heart failure. In our circles, one tends to simply call such a thing murder, Holmes noted dryly. Therefore, I suggest that I make my abilities as a detective for strontium available to you, Corporal, rather than my rather less developed ones as an entertainer. Agreed. Follow me. The Corporal left the banquet hall with energetic steps, accompanied by the recruit, Holmes, and Dr. Watson. Torno was still considering whether he should join them, but thought better of it, and instead asked his neighbour to the left. By the way, what was that delicate meat, my friend? A dead enemy, came the reply, whereupon Torno felt slightly nauseous. Silently, the Corporal and his companions stood before the dead man, whose ornate golden insignia on the Kevlar overalls revealed that he outranked the Corporal. His facial expression suggested a peaceful passing, his eyes wide open, looking more surprised than frightened, as if just before his death he had wondered that his time had now come. He was probably about to enter the dining hall, explained Wigmore. I was walking behind him when he suddenly collapsed. Death did not come to him as an enemy, observed Dr. Watson, who was kneeling beside the dead man. As an army doctor, I have seen far more distorted faces. I suspect someone administered poison to him. Atropine, a neurotoxin from deadly nightshade, for instance, causes a very noticeable dilation of the pupils, which is clearly evident in the deceased. Under such bright light, his pupils would not normally appear this dilated. The Corporal immediately verified this. Correct. His death must therefore have been preceded by an interaction with atropine. The doctor nodded approvingly. And atropine can be found in any well-stocked medicine cabinet, including yours, I dare say. Naturally, Lydon confirmed. I am not a medic. How long does the poison take to have its effect? That depends on the dosage, explained Dr. Watson as he stood up, and on the consumption of other medications. Who would have benefited from his death? Sherlock Holmes posed his typically crucial question that could lead directly to the perpetrator. The recruit's eyes wandered towards the Corporal. The world consists of schemes and plans that are diametrically opposed to one another, Lydon philosophised, folding his hands across his stomach. I have one advantage, as I will now move up in rank. However, I would never kill a superior officer during wartime, as this would weaken our fighting strength. Nevertheless, I cannot assume such logical behaviour from others. Shouldn't you have had to wait for the Major before starting the feast? Inquired Dr. Watson. In our time, there was a very strict hierarchy. We don't have fixed meal times, Lydon shook his head. Neither during deployment nor during ceasefire. It was also quite normal for the Major to have his meals served to his room. Might I inspect his room? Asked Holmes politely. Of course, the Corporal showed himself cooperative. Let us proceed there together. Hundreds of kilometres away as the crow flies, Decker pondered how to overcome the scrambler that made contact with his first officer impossible. Daphlon, it simply cannot be that we, as an advanced species, allow a primitive technical obstacle to prevent us from normal communication. It is practically a testament to our inadequacy. Said the scientific director. I could try to intercept individual snippets of conversation, mirror them, and then reassemble them meaningfully. Yes, do get on with it, he urged him, clapping his hands encouragingly. Chop, chop! I want to know what's happening down there straight away. The Major's room turned out to be quite luxuriously furnished. A large four-poster bed stood on one side, whilst on the other was a wide desk with a console and a widescreen display above it. Via split screen, one could observe several tunnel corridors and the events on the surface through the display. At present, night was spreading its dark cloak over the desert landscape above, and the moon shone down almost romantically. Corporal Lydon dropped into the comfortable chair in front of the desk and watched the events on the screen with interest. Wigmore stood beside him, alternately glancing at the screen and then back to Holmes and Watson, who were both eagerly searching for a container of poison. They found what they were looking for in the adjoining bathroom. A dark bottle stood on the washstand, which Holmes carefully examined with his magnifying glass that he had tucked away in his jacket pocket. "That's what I thought," he said to the doctor. "Alcohol, presumably not for medicinal purposes. The bottle is clean, with only one handprint on it, which in all likelihood belongs to the victim." Hardly had he spoken when the corporal joined them. "We make spirits from the mushrooms that our enemies use for food. Everyone gets a ration of 4 bottles per month. The robots deliver the bottles to each of our quarters. We can examine the rest from the bottle to be certain, but I assume we will find the lethal atropine in it," remarked Holmes, putting his magnifying glass away. "The only remaining question is who crept unnoticed into the Major's room to poison his drink, or who had tampered with his bottle before delivery. As you can see, hardly anyone could have crept into the Major's room unnoticed, unless he briefly left to dine with the troops, which was not the case yesterday, for example, and the robots are solely responsible for the deliveries." "You mentioned 4 bottles per month, Corporal," pondered Holmes, "which means the poison must have been in the last bottle, as I cannot see any others here." "Correct," confirmed the corporal. "Tomorrow we all receive the new delivery. This means the murderer was not in a hurry to reach his goal. Perhaps he planned his crime weeks ago and speculated that after the Major had drunk the poison, he could no longer be traced. Whilst the robots were clearing away the plates in the banquet hall, Tornow desperately tried to re-establish contact with the ship using his smart bracelet. He kept typing the same message over and over. "Help! The corporal here believes we have come to deliver women for breeding purposes. A murder has occurred, and Sherlock Holmes is trying to solve it, for which he will receive strontium. For food, they eat their dead enemies, sand crawlers, who are currently maintaining a ceasefire with the soldiers. On the Ultimo one, Daflon was simultaneously trying to piece together the scrambled text. At last, he was able to give the captain some positive news. 'Sir, I believe I have managed to crack the code of the scrambler and reconstruct Tornow's message.' 'Bravo!' rejoiced Decker, and sat down contentedly in his command chair. 'Well then, read it out.' 'Ahem. For the purpose of further reproduction, the corporal's wife wants to commit murder with the help of Sherlock Holmes. For sustenance, the soldiers receive a delivery of strontium, which is scavenged from dead enemies crawling in the sand. The weapons are clearing towards a standstill.' 'Do you know what I believe, Daflon?' asked Decker, rather rhetorically. 'That cannot be quite right.' With his hands clasped behind his back, the corporal paced up and down in the Major's room. 'It seems to me that even you cannot solve the murder of my superior officer, Mr. Holmes.' 'Perhaps not about the motive, which is obvious. However, we can just as well assume that the murderer had no direct advantage from the Major's demise,' Holmes suggested. 'That he simply acted out of a deep aversion to the man. What sort of person was he, the deceased?' 'Major Yardley?' the corporal assured himself before condescending to give a character description. The Major was a very proper, but also rather harsh fellow. One should only speak well of the dead. However, some of the soldiers feared him because of his bellowing and his strict collective punishments.' 'What collective punishments did he order then?' inquired the doctor. 'Well, for a forgotten piece of equipment, he would make the entire brigade sweat it out in the heat,' Lydon revealed, shaking his head from side to side. 'That could have resulted in a certain hostility of a purely personal nature.' 'Did you also suffer under him, Corporal?' Holmes ventured to ask a rather delicate question. 'Only once. He bellowed at me in front of the assembled troops, saying I had deeply disappointed him. At the moment, I cannot recall the reason for it. Must have been some trifling matter that got him so worked up. But that was... just a moment, let me think. Yes, 9 years and 3 months ago.' 'Well, they do say revenge is a dish best served cold,' Dr. Watson joked, which earned him a nasty look from Lydon. Take note, Doctor, he hissed at him with a crimson face, whilst droplets of saliva shot from his mouth, that there is absolutely no place for such private quarrels over completely insignificant trifles in a fighting unit against inhuman enemies. Do you understand me? Do not get so worked up, Corporal, the doctor warded off with an additional gesture. It is bad for your health. I did not mean to imply any ill intent. Hatred can develop naturally. That would be quite normal when dealing with difficult people. I concentrate my hatred solely on an enemy who persistently and tirelessly makes our lives a living hell, in addition to the prevailing heat on the surface. Anything else would be a sheer waste of energy. Yes, that makes sense to me, Corporal, said Dr. Watson, visibly satisfied with this clear statement. And what do you think, Wigmore? Inquired Holmes of the young recruit, who had silently observed the dispute. I am not permitted to think anything. I am here to mindlessly follow orders, he claimed spontaneously, whilst briefly glancing at Lydon and back to Holmes. The corporal now smiled like the Sphinx from Greek mythology when someone could not solve its riddle, and was therefore doomed to die, yet said nothing. Sherlock Holmes sauntered over to the screen, which showed soldiers bustling back and forth along the corridors, evidently either heading to their quarters or carrying out an assignment. Dr. Watson had known his friend long enough to suspect that he was once again hatching a scheme. I assume there are no recordings of the events we can see here, said Holmes casually. Otherwise, you would have already checked them, Corporal. Again, Lydon smiled and agreed. That is correct. The cameras do not record anything, as no such incident has ever occurred before, Mr. Holmes. There is a technology on our spaceship that allows us to easily set such screens to show the past, claimed Holmes with raised eyebrows. They then display the events which took place up to 8 weeks before the murder. Oh? The expressions of both the corporal and Private Wigmore transformed into living question marks. Yes, therefore, I suggest we briefly say goodbye to fetch this technology. Holmes continued in a conversational tone. If you would kindly hand over some of the promised strontium now, 1 kilogram will suffice for the time being. Then there is absolutely nothing standing in the way of solving this tricky case. One could clearly see what was going on in Lydon's mind by studying his physiognomy. He appeared to be torn between whether to believe it, and if he did believe it, whether to approve it or reject it outright. Wigmore's pupils darted towards the corporal, weighing up how he would decide, then glanced back at Holmes and Watson, who were smiling in unison, friendly and confident. After an almost endless minute of deliberation, Joseph Lydon finally came to a decision. Very well, Wigmore. Yes, sir. The recruit snapped to attention. Fetch 1 kilogram of the requested light metal. At your command, sir. At once, recruit Wigmore ran off. Tornott still sat alone at the long table, tapping on his bracelet. At last, he received a reply. We must decline the murder of the corporal's wife. We shall bury the strontium for the soldiers in the sand. The weapons fall silent, and aid shall be delivered to the dead enemy. Suddenly, an uneasy feeling came over him. He turned around and recognized Adjutant Sharp behind him, who was watching him with narrowed eyes. What are you doing there, First Officer? Ha, laughed Tornott nervously. I am desperately trying to establish contact with the mothership, which for inexplicable reasons I am unfortunately unable to do. All information technology is being blocked by us to prevent the enemy from calling for reinforcements, Sharp said in choppy-sounding words, as if his utterances were also subject to technical limitations. His eyes widened, his thin lips twisted into a smirk. Oh, I see. So that means these sandcrawlers aren't actually native to this place? No, although they arrived before us. You've already seen the remains of their spacecraft. Yes, that's true. I was standing on a capsule. Tell me, Sharp, I'm curious. What do these sandcrawlers actually look like? Ghastly. Imagine a crayfish standing before you on 4 legs, staring at you with black, bulging eyes. Whilst it lacks claws, it has 6-fingered hands on both arms instead, and beneath its chitinous armour beat 2 hearts. That's why these nightmare creatures are so difficult to kill. Even the combat robots struggle with them. And where do these crab creatures come from? Torno wanted to know. The question is wrong, Sharp criticised him. It should be, how do we drive them away again? But surely you must have given it some thought, Torno persisted. Sharp pondered briefly, squinting his eyes again. They surely originate from a planet with abundant water, but their origin is irrelevant to the fight against them. And how did you enjoy our meal, First Officer? A slight horror befell Torno. Before I knew what it consisted of, excellent. Ha ha! Sharp laughed and walked around behind the First Officer, sat down beside him and became reproachful in tone. The great advantage of these cretins is that they had females on board. They breed as quickly as rats. Why didn't the Union give us any women? Why not? Of course, Torno did not know how to respond to that. His unease grew. Good question. The wisdom of our Union sages remains entirely unfathomable to my small human brain. As a recipient of orders like yourself, my dear Sharp, I assume that those responsible for this important endeavour did not want to burden the ladies with doing all the dirty work here. That requires brave men who do not fear death. Am I right? Aha! With this assumption, he seemed to be satisfied, stood up and left the hall without looking back once. Phew! Escaped the First Officer with an exhale as he began typing on his armband again, unable to understand what sort of confusing text had been transmitted to him. Mr. Tornot! Holmes called to him from the entrance to the hall, making him jump. We are flying back to Ultimo 1 with the strontium. I shall tell you everything else during the flight. My stomach feels rather peculiar. Can't you be more specific now, Holmes? Something helps us that must never be underestimated in any military operation. The element of surprise. Come quickly, urged the master detective. I certainly hope so, because the message I received, Torno told him on the way, makes absolutely no sense. And moreover, this Sharp fellow gave me the 3rd degree. The fact that these poor men have had to manage without women for 20 years seems to have already had a negative effect on them. Yes, one should never underestimate the beneficial influence of the fairer sex upon us men, Holmes agreed, hurrying towards the exit. The 3 of them made their way to the shuttle with the captured strontium. During the night, the temperatures dropped to a pleasant 29 degrees. The moon shone brightly, and none of the notorious enemies appeared. I hope the ceasefire with these sandcrawlers holds for the short time we need for takeoff, said Torno, whilst running towards the shuttle lying in the sand. If possible, it should hold until we return, Dr. Watson panted behind him. I beg your pardon? You want to come back here? The First Officer could not believe it. I pray to God that I never have to set foot on this desolate planet again. Joy prevailed on the Ultimo 1 when the trio arrived with the required light metal. Well done indeed, Decker was full of praise. However, we struggled to make any sense of the message we received. After clearing up all uncertainties and installing the strontium in the accelerator, Decker wanted to depart immediately, but Holmes managed to convince him that it would be against the behaviour of a gentleman not to return. You know, when I start something, I see it through to the end, Holmes insisted on his return. But this technique that you invented in your hour of greatest need doesn't even exist, the captain implored him. And this corporal, who is presumably also the murderer of his superior officer, surely won't wait around to be exposed by you. Of course not. According to my assessment, he will destroy the screen so that I cannot apply the technique, which he does not know is non-existent, Holmes stated with absolute conviction. What about the promised women? Torno reminded him. What do you intend to tell him about their non-existence? Do let that be my concern. I have devised something with Daphlon, Holmes informed him. As far as I'm concerned, Tornote conceded. But I'll tell you one thing straight away, my dear Holmes. I won't eat any more meat down there. And so it came to pass that Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, together with the brave Tornote, landed once again on Dorado B the following day. In his hands, Holmes held a compact device that served to produce building material from grains of sand. And they were already expected. The corporal stood flanked by his two adjutants, ready and wearing a mournful expression. Something dreadful has happened, he insisted. I already suspect it, Holmes nodded to him. The screen fell victim to sabotage, am I right? No, Wigmore has tried to take his own life, Lydon revealed to him. Quick, come, Dr. Watson. At a running pace, they all hurried down the steps into the underworld and found the severely wounded Wigmore lying in the corridor, precisely at the spot where Major Yardley had also died. Even with the most modern methods, nothing more could be done. Dr. Watson shook his head regretfully. Half his skull is missing, the brain is exposed. In a hoarse voice, Wigmore wheezed pathetically before his death. Send my blood to the self-toasting, ever-pouring, courage-drinking, success-thirsty Union. Now there was a patriot, the likes of which I thought had long since died out. Lydon expressed his respect for this young man who, even with his last breath, thought of his ideals. This makes it clear that he poisoned the Major because he and his comrades suffered under him. We certainly won't be cloning him again. As if I had foreseen it, instead of the announced technology, I brought you this apparatus for faster construction of an above-ground facility, explained Holmes, and solemnly handed the compact device to the corporal. With this magical gadget, you can produce concrete from sand. The ladies wish to join you only after the completion of a respectable housing complex. Well, they all suffer from claustrophobia, Torno grinned. Besides, we would still need a peace treaty with the enemies to make the ladies happy. Indeed, indeed, said the corporal, visibly disappointed. It will likely take several more years until we have decimated the enemy enough that they finally agree to peace with us. Perhaps you should also change your diet to achieve peace, Corporal Lydon, Holmes advised him with a wink, whilst patting him encouragingly on the shoulder. You were listening to Espionage. The Desolate Planet. Sherlock Holmes, The Galactic Cases. Episode 15. Based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go Audio production.